A new hope for a COVID-19 vaccine. U.S. firm Pfizer says its candidate has proven 90% effective and could be rolled out by the end of the year. But is this realistic? And how do we ensure everyone has equal access? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. It's being hailed as a great day for science and humanity. U.S. drug giant Pfizer says its COVID-19 vaccine candidate worked on more than 90% of people during a mass clinical trial. The company, along with Germany's BioNTech, wants to get emergency approval soon so people can get the vaccination from December. It's raising hopes of an end to a pandemic that's killed more than 1 million people and destroyed economies around the world. But scientists are urging caution. We'll bring in our guests in a moment. First, this report from Charlie Angela.
1.3 billion doses by the end of the year. That's the claim from drug makers Pfizer and BioNTech after announcing their COVID vaccine is more than 90% effective. Theirs is the first successful data from a large-scale clinical trial, and widespread vaccinations could roll out by the end of December, following an application for an emergency use approval from regulators within weeks. German company BioNTech admit they're still waiting on more results to further prove its safety.
It's true that this type of medication has no approval yet, which is why we are carrying out this compatibility study with more than 40,000 test persons to find out if there is any intolerance, even a rare one. What we can prove with this study is that the vaccine is compatible and that side effects are mild and moderate, and that there are no severe side effects.
News of the vaccine sent global stock markets soaring. Scientists welcome the news of the 90% effectiveness, much higher than been expected, but also raised questions.
We have to know who received the vaccine in this first trial and evaluate if this fantastic result could be extended also to other populations which are much more in need for being vaccinated. I mean, oldest people, people with comorbidities, who are at risk of severe infections and probably were not included in the first trial.
As the World Health Organization's decision-making body met in a largely virtual conference, questions were already being raised about how any vaccine would be distributed, especially to developing countries.
The world has come together as never before to ensure these life-saving tools are developed, produced, and allocated fairly as global public goods, not private commodities that become one more reason some people are left behind.
1.2 million people have now died of the virus, and more than 50 million people have caught it, 10 million of them in the US. But the pandemic shows no signs of abating, with Hungary and Portugal the latest countries in Europe to reimpose strict measures. The Assembly did have one reason to celebrate. The victory of Joe Biden means the US will be re-establishing its relationship with the WHO after Trump formally began withdrawing in July. The funding the US brings is key, as the organization revealed. Although the world's expectations of the WHO have grown dramatically, their budget hasn't. Charlie Angela, Al Jazeera.
Pfizer's is one of a dozen vaccines in the final stages of testing. In August, Russia approved the first vaccine called Sputnik V before large-scale safety trials even began. U.S. biotech firm Moderna says it's on track to produce 500 million doses of its inoculation annually from next year. British firm AstraZeneca and Oxford University have resumed testing their candidate after a participant fell seriously ill in September. And in Brazil, the government has halted a trial of China's Sinovac vaccine after what the health regulator called a severe adverse event. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Washington, D.C., Oscar Alleyne, epidemiologist and chief of programs and services for the National Association of County and City Health Officials in the U.S. In New York, Gian Gandhi, who coordinates work at the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, to roll out a potential COVID-19 vaccine. And in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Ali Fattom, Vaccinologist and Vice President of Vaccine Research and Development at BlueWillow Biologics. Welcome to all of you. Ali, let me start with you. This data that Pfizer released, this was not in a peer-reviewed medical journal. So this is not yet conclusive evidence that the vaccine is safe and effective, is it?
No, it's an interim analysis, and interim analysis gives us such a great outcome. It's really interesting that it exceeded all expectation. And still, we are waiting for the final results, which will be analyzed after receiving the rest of the data. Of course, this is a great day and great results, and it does not need to be peer-reviewed because to announce it, because what we have there is an independent DSMB that looked at the data, not the company, not anybody else, but an independent organization or a team. It's called DSMB that looks at these things, and they've seen these great outcomes, and they announce it. Of course, they have to go through the FDA in order to be able to define exactly more details. In addition to the excellent data, it's also a proof of concept. The messenger RNA technology is first time in man and gives you a 90% efficacy. That's a great because we have Moderna, which is also a messenger RNA. So that's a proof of concept, and we should expect that Moderna will be equally or close to efficacy that was shown with the vaccine from BioNTech and Pfizer. So all these things all together gives you a great hope for seeing the light at the end of the tunnel to see that we are going in the right direction and we will have a vaccine. Of course, there are several open questions, and I believe we can talk about that later on, that still need to be answered before we decide or we say that we have a vaccine and we are really getting in full speed.
Oscar, you heard what Ali was saying there. He said that this was a great outcome thus far. There are still a lot of questions. Of course, this announcement, obviously, it reverberated around the world, but there is still a lot that we don't know. So I want to ask you, is it too early to celebrate? And what are exactly the guidelines for rolling out a vaccine?
Thank you very much. It's very interesting because we're still in the throes of just identifying what the distribution allocation and even specifically what those plans are. So within the last month or so, the states had a rapid, the U.S. states, let me rephrase, had a rapid timeline where they had to create and disseminate plans for how, if they were given an early allocation or any allocation of vaccines, what steps they would take to ensure that they get distributed to the communities and to the people that they serve. So specifically, that tells you have a much varied approach across different geographies and recognizing the logistics that's going to be necessary, in addition to concerns around vaccine hesitancy and in general targeted population to ensure that you have enough of the vaccine, whether it's early dissemination or later dissemination, provided in that tiered approach, very similar to what we saw in H1N1. So there's going to be a lot of logistics, a lot of apprehension, but also a lot of hopefulness in regard to hopefully we can turn the corner with respect to this particular vaccine and the pandemic as a whole.
Oscar, you brought up a keyword there, logistics, which is something I was going to ask Gian about. So let me turn to Gian now, because this issue of logistics obviously is of paramount importance. It's going to be very difficult to ensure that a COVID-19 vaccine can be delivered throughout the world. I know UNICEF has already started laying the groundwork on this. UNICEF is very experienced as far as trying to set up logistics for the delivery of vaccines around the world. Tell us about your efforts thus far.
Certainly, yeah, and there's a lot of parallels actually to what Oscar was saying. So I think for us, we're looking to serve the needs globally, and so a lot of the work that we've been doing right now has been to assess the capacity, particularly of cold chain in countries around the world, particularly low and middle income countries. Also looking more generally across the programs themselves, all of the issues that will come into play, whether that's advocacy and communication, social mobilization, the programming and training of healthcare workers, And so a lot of the work right now is really an assessment that countries are leading themselves, country governments are leading themselves using a checklist, a tool that WHO and UNICEF have developed and are working through with those country stakeholders. And of course, one of the key issues within that is of course ensuring that there is the cold chain capacity, the fridges, the freezers that will be necessary to roll out these vaccines.
Ali, will a vaccine that prevents COVID-19 be enough to stop the spread of the virus?
That's a great question, because what we know from viral infections is that the injectable vaccines, although can prevent disease in many cases, they would not prevent colonization and spread. And if they do it for a short period of time, and because we lack what we call mucosal immunity with the injectable vaccines. We believe that in this case, the virus can still be around in the nose of people even vaccinated. It would be interesting to look at asymptomatic cases in the vaccine studies that will tell us exactly how long they've been free, or how long the virus can stay there and spread. So basically, what we need really is looking at the colonization and in asymptomatic carriers who receive the vaccine. If that's the case, then we need to start looking and thinking about new strategies that can approach a second generation vaccine, which will tackle this problem of colonization and the spread. Because in the case of epidemic and pandemic, you will never get to 100% immunization and vaccination, and therefore you need to find a way to prevent colonization and the spread, which we call the herd immunity in this case, that we will be reducing the viral load in the community, and therefore we could control epidemics and pandemics.
Oscar, I'd like to talk for a moment about how this particular vaccine is going to work, because my understanding is usually when one gets vaccinated, you're given either a weakened or a dead part of the virus. But the way that this virus works, it's called mRNA. What specifically does that mean? How is this different?
So the particular target of this vaccine, as we're speaking about the mRNA, it focuses on what is called a spike protein, which is on the surface of using very, I would say, significant general terms. The surface of the virus, there's a spike protein that allows you to target that level of what we call an immune response. So by utilizing this target of the spike protein to generate this immunological response, you are not necessarily wouldn't need to create what we call a live attenuated virus, where you actually using specific live virus or disabled live virus, I should say, to present that kind of response. So the mRNA style of the vaccination is, as our colleagues mentioned earlier, is a totally new concept for implementation in the human population, and it provides some great strategies. On the flip side, the concern, of course, are the medical countermeasures that are going to be necessary. Most jurisdictions are not going to have ultra cold storage facilities for this type of virus, or this type of vaccine, I should say. And also, there's going to be, from what we understand, the need for a 2-dose administration. So individuals will have to really understand that to get the vaccine, you're not going to be immediately, protected, and you will require at least a second dose administration. So there are a lot of devils in the details, but that's to the extent of being very general in the description of the mRNA process.
Gian, if I could ask you to expand a little bit on what you were talking about a few moments ago, because when it comes to the distribution logistics here, I mean, you mentioned in your earlier answer this cold chain that's going to have to exist, because it has to be, this vaccine is going to have to be kept in cold temperatures. How much more of a challenge does that pose for the distribution of this vaccine? And does this mean that governments are going to have to play a key role in distribution?
Yeah, thanks. So UNICEF's working with our partners, the World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, as part of a global COVID vaccine access facility known as COVAX. And that facility overall is looking, of course, at trying to build a portfolio of vaccines that may be successful, may be safe, effective, and licensed, and ultimately recommended for use throughout the world. And so with that portfolio comes a diversity of needs in the systems that we're looking at, health systems that we're looking at across low and particularly middle-income countries. And what our teams are doing, we have essentially teams of logisticians from the World Health Organization and UNICEF that are right now really doing assessments of the cold chain capacity, particularly in lower middle income countries, and looking at building on what we've already been really putting in place over recent years with the support of Gavi, WHO, and UNICEF have been putting in place around 40,000 fridges, really that are useful for vaccines that would that kind of reflect the normal storage temperatures of most vaccines that we work with. So that's 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. And those facilities, those fridges that are already in place will serve as a, if you like, as the foundation of many of the logistics requirements for many of the products that we see in the pipeline right now. UNICEF's assessment of the market that we conducted earlier this year with inputs from many vaccine manufacturers gave us a sense that the vast majority of the products in the pipeline, the manufacturers, developers are targeting a 2 to 8 degrees Celsius requirement. So certainly that foundation is in place. It will be leveraged as best possible. Of course, there are other vaccines, such as the oral polio vaccine, that require slightly more stringent temperature requirements, such as minus 20 degrees Celsius. And again, because of the almost ubiquitous use of oral polio in the developing world, there is already a degree of capacity for vaccines that might require those kinds of temperatures. And then, of course, anything more stringent, there's much more limited use in the developing world. Certainly, the trials of some of the Ebola vaccines that were conducted predominantly in West Africa have led to some amount of cold chain capacity at even more stringent temperatures. But certainly that is not as widespread as, if you like, the other types of fridges and freezers that I referred to earlier. So I think need to be investment and investment depending on where vaccines are ultimately recommended for use to ensure that the systems have the capacity to absorb.
Ali, I want to take a step back because for those who are unfamiliar with some of the scientific terminology, all of this can be a little bit confusing. So I want to focus on two particular things. There is vaccine efficacy and there is vaccine effectiveness. And these are slightly different terms when it comes to describing how effective a vaccine can be. Could you explain this difference to our viewers and how it applies to the vaccine?
Well, vaccine efficacy is the ability of the vaccine to prevent the disease in a controlled study. And effectiveness, when you look at the general effectiveness of the vaccine in the community and its impact. And therefore, you have to show efficacy in a controlled study in order to license a vaccine and for the FDA to evaluate the efficacy of the vaccine. So therefore, these are really related terms, not really very much different. So therefore, the efficacy is really what we are looking at in this ongoing clinical trial right now. And also, one major thing that we are really following is the safety. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's the first time in man, and therefore we would like to look at the safety. And in the ongoing studies, the maximum safety that we are getting is in the median is 2 months. And 2 months, by all means, is a short term kind of safety, and we would probably wait for long-term safety later on by monitoring these people going forward. So there are short-term, and in a pandemic context, you cannot wait for a year to collect all of that, and therefore the FDA felt comfortable that any impact on the safety of the vaccine, 2 months median follow-up is good enough to give us an indication what to expect. But still, we would like to know more about long-term safety of the vaccine.
Oscar, you heard Ali there talking about safety, and I want to ask you about the challenges that lie ahead in educating the public into accepting that a vaccine, this vaccine, another vaccine, that a vaccine is safe.
That brings us to the third definition, which is that of vaccine hesitancy. And vaccine hesitancy essentially speaks to the fact of individuals, communities, et cetera, have been hesitant to take in a vaccine for a varied amount of concerns. And at this present moment in the United States, one of the concerns has been the rapidity or how quickly this vaccine has been developed. Has it been processed through a system that really ensures that it is efficacious and effective? And what harm can be put on a population being exposed to a vaccine that they may not feel has been necessarily gone through that particular parameter? The other piece has been the unfortunate impact we've had over the course of time with respect to vaccine deniers and anti-vaccinators. So there's a general anti-science trend, which has unfortunately played a role in why we've not only seen the anxiety, the concern, the fears, but also feeding into this, well, there's a nefarious activity that's being underlying the cause for why vaccines are being pushed. And then you also have the third component, that of those marginalized communities, and especially I'm speaking here in the US, where we have communities of color, indigenous populations, brown, black, Latino, you name it, who are specifically at a greater risk and are seeing a much harder impact for this virus in the pandemic, but who also have had years and decades of concern around systemic racism and other issues that structurally address their ability to have faith in the public health system or the healthcare sector. And then the fourth element is that of this entire response has actually been laden with what we have seen to be an erosion in the confidence in the public health or the scientific community. So when you add all of those together, vaccine hesitancy gets a big H, and it really requires us to have a much significant approach to addressing community engagement, education, and ensuring that the information individuals are getting are coming from reliable sources and that can help bolster their confidence in taking vaccines when they become available.
Gian, we only have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you, if these results that we've heard so far about the vaccine, if they hold up, how would they compare to highly effective childhood vaccines like vaccines for measles?
Well, certainly, I think these results are in that ballpark. I won't comment on the efficacy overall. I think but it's certainly encouraging overall, and I think it gives confidence more generally that the portfolio of vaccines that the COVAX facility and other entities are all trying to build is moving in the right direction. We obviously want a risk-based approach that enables us to ensure that the largest number of shots on goal, if you like, to have ultimately more than one vaccine available. The COVAX facility itself is looking to target 2 billion doses by the end of next year. And of course, that can't be done. That's unlikely to be done just by one vaccine candidate or one manufacturer. So certainly encouraging results are one step along a pathway in the right direction. I would add, that many of the things that Oscar mentioned for the US are very relevant, of course, in the developing world, and UNICEF is also very heavily engaged in social listening, trying to understand the sources and the types of messages that we're hearing on the ground in low and middle income countries, many of which are seeded by anti-vaccine movements elsewhere in the world, particularly in higher income countries, and trying to design our strategies to roll out any of these vaccines as and when they they're proven safe, efficacious, licensed, and obviously recommended for use, so that we have the strategies in place both to address hesitancy and of course the systems in place to absorb the necessary requirements that come with these vaccines. But it's certainly encouraging, but we still have a way to go.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Oscar Alleyne, Gian Gandhi, and Ali Fattom. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.